Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about progressive overload and understanding that progressive overload is the biggest driver of muscle growth. But when we say that, it's not saying, hey, we chase as much weight on the bar as we can get on there through any means necessary. In other words, the reason adding weight to the bar or adding reps causes more muscle growth and a more robust training response is because the muscles have to work harder. Okay, we are challenging the muscles to new stimulus. We're creating an environment to where they are having to work harder, be subjected to more tension, more stress, and accordingly, they adapt. Right? It's called specific adaptation to imposed demands. The said principle in exercise science. In other words, muscles in our body adapt to the specific demands that we place upon it. Okay? Human body's an adaptive machine. All right. So what that means is your form needs to be kind of the same. So in other words, if you cheat an X amount or use X amount of body English, because in many cases that's permissible, okay? There are plenty of exercises we can benefit from that on curls to a certain extent. Right? In other words, let's be honest, most of the guys with the biggest biceps do swing just a little bit on their curls. Right? They're not always crazy strict. They're not always super strict. But the load increases over time. They're usually using pretty heavy weights for that. But they're also using the bicep. They're keeping tension on the bicep. They're not cheating so much of the biceps unloaded, and they're laying back at the top, and then it's unloaded at the top and using tons of swing to get it started. In other words, the bicep is still taking most of the load. Okay? But means we don't necessarily increase the amount of cheating. It means we don't bounce and go reps off of stuff. So in other words, you'll see people who are like, well, when I do this with my deadlift, I can get more reps. Well, that's nonsense. That's not helping you in any ways unless you're in a contest to get the most reps using a form that you're allowed to do. So in other words, guys are like, if I get this technique, I can get, but it's like if you normally would fail at rep 5, finding a technique that lets you get 10 reps because it's technique, but it's not loading the muscles any further, because again, the muscles are not really the full limit anymore, such as instead of resetting guys who just maintain tension and tap off the floor on each rep. Okay, but I'm doing more work, but your muscles aren't doing more work. You're not actually benefiting. Now, if you were to use that identical technique and you over time can add 50 pounds to the whatever you're doing for 10 reps, okay. But it's not the technique that's there. It's because you added the weight or the reps over time while using the same technique. But I would argue you're probably better off on something like a deadlift, resetting every rep and doing it correctly. You're going to get more muscle development from that. All right? Same thing when we come over to benching. Are you bouncing going or are you touching going? Like I often not make the case for pausing, but I don't think that we have to do that. It's certainly possible to build a really big chest on touch and go bench. It can absolutely be done. But if you're going to judge the progressive overload, it needs to be with the exact same amount of touch and go. In other words, you're not bouncing or cheating or adding anymore. Because if you are, then you're not necessarily getting additional overload. All right? And at the end of the day, it is that progressive overload that gets that. The same thing, people are like, well, when I use a slingshot, I get more overload. I can do, 10 reps with my 3-rep max. Yes, because the muscles are doing less work. And you're unloading the muscle at the hardest part where it has the most tension. All right? This is not valid progressive overload. Same thing, guys. I put on sleeves, elbow sleeves, knee sleeves. Well, of course you can lift more weight. You have an external device that is applying external pressure at the part where the lift is the hardest. You're not doing more work. The sleeves are adding work. So in other words, that's not progressive overload. All right, progressive overload means our muscles have to do more work. They have more mechanical tension applied to them. They have more workload applied to them. Because, progressive overload can also be increasing reps. But we need to be clear when we discuss this that it does mean literally doing more reps with the exact same movement and stressors, or adding 5 or 10 or 100 more pounds doing the exact same movement or stressors. Again, this needs to be very, very, very clear in this context. Because if we are not doing that, then we are not progressively overloading. We're just moving more weight using something else besides the muscles to do it. So progressive overload, and that's the problem. Some people are like, well, I just use the really lightweight and do this and focus on the feel. Hey, which is great. I don't have a problem with someone really focusing on the feel. But that feel is not necessarily indicative of work, and it's not going to cause a stimulus. The muscles themselves have to actually be working hard. And just because you feel something doesn't mean you are actually working harder. Such as, again, really, really, really slow negatives. Yes, they make you sore. Yes, they can dramatically reduce what you do, but they've never been found to cause great muscle growth. And again, exercise science is incomplete. I don't want anyone to think I'm saying that the research is amazing. But over a decade ago, they started concluding that when the eccentric reps, that's the lowering of the weight, start exceeding about 4 seconds, they seem to cause less muscle growth, because all they do is just fatigue without creating additional stress on the muscle in terms of mechanical tension. Well, that's not helping us, because it really does seem to be a case of work done seems to be enormous. And again, because it's also not about tearing muscles down. People have that misconception. That's a whole other thing. That's not really what seems to be happening. The tearing is chemical in nature. In other words, metabolic stress is cleaving muscles in a way, right? They're not physically being torn by this stuff. So the tearing is metabolic. And there's a lot of debate as to if that itself is even a critical part of the muscle growth process. But what we do know is that work done by a muscle, we do know that mechanical tension placed upon the individual muscle fiber absolutely seems to be the prevailing driver of muscle growth from training. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.